What if the most powerful team in your entire company felt, well, invisible? Not underpaid, not unskilled, just underused. What if the people best positioned to shape your brand, guide your culture, and multiply your business impact were still stuck being seen as, well, the folks who make things pretty? And what if there was finally a map to change all of that? Our guest today has spent her career helping in house creative leaders go from overlooked to indispensable. She's an entrepreneur, an advisor, and the founder of the Inside Out community. And she's just released a framework that's already changing how top companies think about creative leadership. Emma Sexton is joining me today, and she's here to ask what happens when creative leadership isn't just invited to the table, but finally takes the wheel. We'll unpack her inside out pathway model to explore what happens when creative leadership is missing and why brand has become an orphan. We'll also challenge the assumption that CMOs should be the only creative executives in the room. So if you've ever felt boxed in, sidelined, or just ready to operate at a higher level, this episode is your permission slip. And the pathway model just might be your blueprint. Because once you see creative leadership as a multiplier, you'll never go back to seeing it as a function. Let's get into it. Emma Sexton, welcome to the Creative Ops Podcast.
Well, it's really good to be here, Nish. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I was on your podcast a few months ago, and you've got something that I find fascinating and I think will be very valuable for the audience to learn about. It's your pathways model. But before we get there, just to sort of tee things up, um, as you know, I'll record the intro separately. But I sort of think of you if I had to create like the headline statement for Emma Sexton today, it would be like you're on this mission and it is a mission, it feels like, based on everything you do and write and say, to really get creativity out of the corner in organizations and into the C suite. And that's reflected, of course, in the work that you do as the founder and the head of the Inside Out community, which is, I believe, the world's only community dedicated to in house creative leaders. So when I think about today's episode and the conversation we're about to have is I think about that mission and sort of the through line of this going back from like creativity out of the corner and into the C suite is, you know, like what happens when creativity has no champion in the C suite? And should we really be thinking about in house creative leadership to be that strategic engine moving forward? And we'll probably touch on AI and a couple of other things related to that, but maybe we could start here. Business needs brands, brands need creativity, and creativity needs leadership. But that leadership rarely sits in the C suite. What's been standing in the way? You're at the epicenter of this. So, what's standing in the way?
Well, firstly, thank you for that good summary. It's always interesting to see what people reflect back at you, but you're absolutely right. For some bonkers reason, I feel like I am on a real mission to get more creative leaders into the boardroom. And I think that's really something that I've always been passionate about. I've always been passionate about the business case for creativity ever since I was a designer by trade and I did an MA in design management, which suddenly switched the business light bulb on for me. And I certainly felt like up until that point, I'd been a make it look pretty designer. I'd been an artist. And I think doing that MA really gave me the business case. And then I think having done some roles in house, I was just really frustrated that there was this disconnect between the industry and business, that nobody was really understanding this tool. So it's always been something that I've been really passionate about. I went on to set up my own agency, which is a strategic B2B branding agency. But in the background was always this, I don't know, just felt like a problem that needed solving, that just wasn't being solved by the industry. And now
So,
you're absolutely sorry, Nish.
no, no, please finish.
And I think now we're in this really exciting new era for commercial creativity, because I feel like there's a lot of planets that are now aligning. And you summed it up there in the question, and it's definitely my viewpoint. Business needs brands more than ever. Brands need creativity to create a brand, to connect with audiences, and then we're going to need that creativity having leadership within the business. So I think it's rarely sat in the C-suite, because I think creatives have been really, really bad of making the business case. I think we've kept it in terms of art and, art and design. They're big words, like what do they really mean in the boardroom? But equally, I just don't think that things have been aligned in the way that they are in business, in brand, and where in-house creative teams are now, in a way that is a real opportunity for in-house creative leaders.
So can we? I want to get to the pathways model and sort of the four segments of that you have. I don't know if segments right word, but we'll get to that in a moment. But before we get there, I think it would be valuable just to, you know, maybe deviate a little bit and just talk about like brand. Brand means everything and nothing at the same time. It feels like for most organizations, brand is, oh yeah, we've got a document and it includes information about like the latest version of our logo and how to correctly apply it and what fonts we use and maybe even like vocabulary, like what words we use and what words we don't use. But to you, when you talk about brand, what is brand? Because I think that's part of the issue, that an opportunity that in-house teams have is like, again, brand has become everything and nothing at the same time, it seems like, over the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah, for me, brand is the business driver. I think, for 7 years now, I've been advising early stage startups at the entrepreneurial institutes of King's College London and Imperial too. So I've really seen at the coal face, the early stages of a business, how powerful brand is. But brand really is about connecting those audiences, but also in the world that we're in today, which is, globalization on steroids. Anybody can set up a business on a laptop in a back room of their house and be on a global stage. So therefore, brand is then the only way that you can differentiate. So brand has a totally new meaning now. And when I started in my career, oh my God, maybe 30 years ago, it was a logo and some colors, because brand was really about recognition, and it was very expensive to produce things. And nearly everything you did was printed, or it was a TV ad. Then it was all about experience at every touch point. But now we're moving into this era where it's about emotion, it's about connecting with culture, it's about lots of different channels, it's about lots of different people to connect with. So for me, brand is the only differentiator, and it is then the layer that wraps around the business and helps you make decisions, helps you decide on your products and services. It's the wrapper that allows you to connect to your audiences. So for me, brand is absolutely business critical, and it's a lever for business success.
Yeah, that's a really great way of defining it. What I heard coming through is almost like a decision making framework of what do we do, whether we're making a decision that's internally focused and especially when it's externally focused. Brand should be a decision making framework for an organization. And uh, it is funny, isn't it, that brand um, might be one of the few differentiators remaining moving forward. And it's sort of like the quote unquote soft thing that might become one of the hardest assets, or need to become one of the hardest assets for any organization moving forward. And I know a little bit later, if we get to it, you and I jotted down, I think, 10 or 20 things we thought we might talk about today, but we'll see if we get to it, like CMOs and brands and creative leaders, and how that all might play out. But let's put a pin in that for now. Very valuable definition of brand. Thank you for that. So let's just jump into your pathways model. So first of us, tell us, like, what was the origin story of this? Like, why did you decide, like, what is this? Why did you decide to do this? And then we'll sort of dig into like the four zones that you have defined out in your pathways model.
Well, I think at the Inside Out community, we've got a vision, which is to see more in-house creative leaders in the C-suite. It was a prediction I made maybe 2-3 years ago on my LinkedIn. I've still got the LinkedIn post where I could see the changing role of CMOs, and I could really see an opportunity for in-house creative leaders. So our framework was really born out of So our framework was really born out of a need for me as we built the community. I was starting to see how we were creating all this great content, but actually what was happening is we were in danger of overwhelming all our members. So there was a bit of me going, how can I help our members have their own learning journey, their personalized learning journey? How can I help them navigate the content we're creating and identify their skills gaps? So really it started with me taking what I understood about our members, looking at all the content that we'd produced. And we've been using Adam Morgan's framework for creative leadership, which for me was such a great tool. He has 5 pillars: leading the work, leading the team, leading on a creative vision, leading the company creatively, and leading the industry. So that was helping me to start to frame some of our content. But as I got into it, I think my personal belief has been that you really need leadership if you want your creative team to have impact in the business. If we want to get creativity and design to the highest levels of business, you need a strong leader. Yet the industry tends to just talk about replicating agency models in-house, but it talks about job titles and it talks about models. And for me, it was like, that's not resonating with our members. There isn't a formula. Every in-house team is completely different. But what is consistent is the stages that you can go through as a leader and the impact that design and creativity can have on the business. And that doesn't matter if you're a team of 10 or you're a team of 800, because in my membership community as well, we've got like the leader of Sky's creative team where Kerry Sampson has over 800 members. Now, how can I map him against another leader who might only have 10 people, yet their impact is at the same level within the organization? They're both reporting and influencing the C-suite. How on earth was I going to be able to help them to map and know who they're sitting alongside and who their peers were? So it really was a tool for those learning journeys.
So you don't really think about there's other models that are out there that both you and I are familiar with that's more about defining it by like the capabilities or even size. And as you said, that's really sort of a mirror on how external agencies tend to be defined by themselves and the analysts of the world. You're sort of making me think about I wonder if one of the issues with in-house teams, even though there's been this massive acceleration on the number of brands that have in-house teams and more investment into them, is there's still sort of this, would it be fair to say, a bit of an inferiority complex? And is that where it sort of comes from, where in-house teams are still defining themselves by the way external agencies are defined?
Yes, I think so. We launched a report a couple of years ago, and everything we put in the report still stands. It hasn't dated, even though we launched it in early 2024. But in there, I put that we're in the 4th wave of in-housing creativity. And I think that actually the whole industry is stuck in wave 3. So wave 1 started in the 1990s. It was really about saving money. It was desktop publishing, really good practical solution because branding's just a badging exercise. Then there was wave 2, which started in the kind of the 2000s, and in-housing was starting to mature. A couple of companies like Specsavers in the UK were hiring creative pioneers such as Graham Daldry, who used to be at Ogilvy, but they were kind of few and far between. And there was such a disconnect between the two. It took kind of special hires like Graham who really wanted to understand the business. And then wave 3 sort of emerged in the 2010s. So brands are starting to see the opportunity. They can decrease costs. They can make things more efficient. And they're really starting to build out their own in-house creative capabilities. But really, in-housing creativity was in disguise. Everybody was using the term agency because the industry, certainly in the UK, and I don't think this is very different for the US or Australian or global markets, is that in-house wasn't really valued. So it was very difficult to hire great talent. And that's when you saw a lot of in-house teams giving themselves agency names. Now, that's where I think things have got stuck. I think the terminology of in-house agency is no longer relevant. I think replicating the agency model in-house is no longer needed because talent is moving over there now. And actually there's a lot of dysfunctions and overhang of the word agency that in-house teams don't want to do. Sky have dropped the term agency, Specsavers have. But I think really also those teams are only focused on marketing. Where we are now, we're in the fourth wave of in-housing creativity. And there's a few leaders who are kind of ignoring that industry conversation and cracking on with things behind the scene. And they really understand the power of creativity and design. And along with that, we've also got successful businesses that have had designers at the forefront. We've got Evan Sharp, who was the co-founder of Pinterest, who was previously a product designer. We've got Brian Chesky, who was one of the co-founders at Airbnb. So we've got some success stories now. And the fourth wave is where I see in-house creative leaders being in the C-suite and having more CCO roles.
So, as you and I have discussed offline many times, we're both aligned on that. I've got this prediction that chief creative officers are today's untapped organizational leader, and they are tomorrow's CEO.
Yeah.
That they're going to do that, and we're even starting to see it. I think of like Silicon Valley, which I take from Silicon Valley what I think is valuable, and then I leave the rest to them. But one of the things I found interesting there over the last little while is that they're now starting to think of like people with that design and creative skill set as like the people they want to fund, who are going to create the next $1 billion unicorns. And I think existing companies would be well served to pay attention to that, to really pay attention to the mission that you've been on for years now.
Yeah, well, it was Aaron Epstein, actually. It was very recently, and he's part of Y Combinator, and he did this sort of public announcement that they are seeking out design founders, which was really exciting to me. And he mentioned Airbnb and Stripe as being known for their exceptional design. But what he didn't mention was the importance of brand. And I think this is where we're coming into this era, which is really interesting in terms of the conversation around design and the conversation around creativity. I personally feel like we should be moving those conversations towards brand, because brand is what businesses understand, and design and creativity are kind of levers or tools that are played in the creation of brand. But I would still argue that even the best design product still needs brand to get cut through and create differentiation. So it's a very exciting time, Nish, that you're right. Designers, creatives, the CEOs, I can definitely see that.
Yeah, I think it's coming, and I think it's going to happen quicker than most people expect. Not as quick as you and I would like it to see it happen, but I think quicker than everyone else will expect to see it happening. Probably create additional retention issues for the external agency world as well as for brands themselves who are trying to hang on to creative and design talent. And then we'll see how it all plays out. Is it brand? Is it creative? Is it design? That sort of leads the charge. I think part of that will sort of play out around identity and things like that, which is a good segue into let's go a layer deeper on your pathways model. You've sort of got these 4 zones of influence and impact that you talk about. So tell us about the 4. I'm going to put a link to the report in the show notes. I encourage everybody to read this because it's not cookie cutter. It's going to get people to think, but we'll get into that in a moment. But walk us through like these 4 zones.
Yeah, so we've got the two axes basically. The bottom axis is Adam Morgan's 5 stages, although we've positioned leading the industry as applicable for any level. And then along the left hand side, we've got our y axis is focused on being a tactical, strategic, or integral team. So you can really see that the leadership directly influences the impact of the team. And that's given way to these 4 quadrants, I guess, or 4 zones, I like to call them. So zone 1 is very executional. It's about leading the work and leading the team. But the business impact of your work as an in-house creative leader is much more on the tactical side. Then you've got zone 2, which is supporting, where you're still leading the work and leading the team, and your work is still an important part of the business, but you're quite vulnerable here as the rest of the business can't really see your value. Then there's zone 3, which is strategic, which is where I would say the majority of our members are. And they're leading on a creative vision and leading the company creatively, but still not having the conversations in the C-suite, which is probably also where the conversation around in-house agencies sit as well. And then we've got zone 4, which is our visionary zone. And this is where you become absolutely integral. You're impacting on research and development. You're influencing the C-suite. You're probably in the C-suite. And really, that's where I want all in-house creative leaders to be operating. And when I say in-house creative leaders, you don't have to have a creative background to be a leader of our creative team. You know, in our community, we've got people who've had production backgrounds, operations backgrounds, account management backgrounds. So I just want to be clear that, you know, this is far reaching and applicable.
Yeah, ironically, that word creative as an adjective is almost it's again sort of like brand. It's become everything and nothing. It's sort of confused with, oh, the 4 guys in the corner that know how to use Photoshop or something, or the people that have these, like, flights of fancy ideas. I was speaking to Ivan Pauls recently. I know you just dropped an episode with him, and the one I did with him will be coming out shortly. And he talks about, like, creativity. Like, creativity is just a human trait and characteristic, and it could be expressed in any number of ways. It's more of a mindset, which really seems to be the thing that needs to anchor itself in organizations as part of that, like, that category 4, that visionary category. And just sort of going back through these categories, just to make sure I understand it correctly. So, executional, these are doers, and their identity is actually pretty their identity of self and how they're perceived in the organization seems pretty black and white. It's straightforward. Like, they have value in terms of, like, doing work. So scale and speed, cost efficiency, I imagine, is what matters there. Supporting seems to be sort of this gray zone, almost like being a teenager in a way. We're not children anymore, but we're not adults yet. We don't really know ourselves yet. The people around us don't really know us or what to make of us. Strategic starts to get into, I think of it as, like, I think you called it business partners. You're starting to have more influence in shaping the work, more collaborative, like, let's figure this out together. And visionary, again, which is the mission you're on to, you know, push creative leaders into that C suite. That's really where the full value and potential of creative leadership, in whatever form it comes in, whatever the background is, that's really where it gets unlocked.
Yeah, totally. I would say zone 1 and zone 2 are kind of where in-house teams often start or have started. And zone 1 and 2, you're definitely much more of a cost saving angle there. But zone 4, and it's great that you mentioned Ivan Poles, because he was one of the very early members of our community. When I met Ivan, I really think he's a pioneer of what I'm calling his 4th wave of in-housing creativity, because he really did approach setting up that team completely differently. He carved out his own role to the C-suite. Took him, 7 years of being tenacious, but he really understands that business, and he really knows how to articulate and enable the business with creativity. And he carved out his own CCO role. So I often say to Ivan, I want the people who come through Inside Out community, all the resources that we're creating with the podcast, the pathway. I really want to create more Ivans. I want Ivan to be the represent the alumni of anybody who's come through Inside Out.
Yeah, he's a really deep thinker about all this, and I think I agree with you. He really represents where we should be headed and where every CEO should be thinking about taking creative leadership inside their organizations, because it's about like bringing that creative mindset and really having creativity as part of an organization's DNA. Because you and I have talked about this offline. We're moving into a time where like the ability to copy each other in terms of like products, services, pricing models, marketing campaigns and everything else has never been easier, and it's just going to keep getting easier. So to me, every organization needs to be a perpetual innovation engine. Innovation isn't going to be like a sometimes thing. Oh, it's been like 4 years. We should probably do something innovative to like refresh what we're putting out into market. And creativity just needs to be part of how every company operates, and it's got to be infused everywhere. So that creative mindset and the opportunity for the creative leader to be at the C-suite table and really take responsibility for that. So it's not just about serving the needs of the marketing machine. It's really about, so it's not about just the go-to-market engine. It's really about the company's innovation engine or perpetual innovation engine.
Yeah, which brand is a huge driver for, because
Yep.
brand is really about what makes sense for you as a business, because you can have innovation. A company can come up with lots of different ideas or problems that they're solving for a particular audience. But what makes sense for your brand and your purpose and the reason that you're here, and that transformation journey you want to take a customer on, whether you're B2B or B2C, there needs to be a before and after, and it needs to all make sense. So again, brand just becomes this crucial lever. And again, creativity and design are in service of the brand and coming up with the innovation within that brand.
So let's talk about brand a little bit more, and let's pull the CMO into this conversation. We've got quite a few CMOs that are now listening to the Creative Ops podcast. And, one of the things we've talked about, if I'm a CMO and I'm listening to this, I'm going, well, that's not the creative leader's job. That's my job. I already sit at the C-suite. But you and I've both talked about on LinkedIn and other places that, brand is sort of this like orphan now. It's already been forgotten, pushed to the side. I also believe that CMOs are the most confused executives, at the C-suite table. They don't really know what they are anymore. Um, so let's talk about like, why did brands get orphaned? Why are CMOs so confused? And if a CMO is listening, why isn't it them who should be sitting at the C-suite going, I'm going to ensure that we become that creativity is part of our operating system as a company?
I think you have to look at just how business and brand has changed. When I wrote my LinkedIn post over 2 years ago, where I first sort of could see what was happening, I was at this exclusive event, which was just for CMOs. And they had a guy called Rupert Bedell, who was the VP of marketing at American Express at the time. And he was talking about the evolution of the CMO. And he said in 2005, a CMO's role was about creative development, brand strategy, media strategy, web design, campaign management, and sales support. Now, in 2022, at the time, it was about digital capabilities and new technology. It was full funnel expertise. It was investment in planning and measurement, risk and compliance. Basically, it's the CMO role is now this 360-degree toolkit. It's not just about branding skills alone. It's a lot more of kind of the technical, the data, the analysis, and also all the channels that we have. It's actually, I just feel like it's an impossible role for a CMO to be across all those things I mentioned. Brand strategy is huge. Media strategy is huge. Web design is big and complicated now. Campaigns, you might do several campaigns a year. Supporting sales, like to me, I just do not see how one person can be in charge of all of those and owning the emotion. Like, who is in charge of the emotions at an organization that create brand? Who is the person that's going to be at all those touch points? The marketeer might decide what those touch points are, but who's going to decide how you engage at each one of those touch points? Because that's a creative decision.
Yeah, it's you're right, and I think it shows up in the data. Like, we're all familiar with the average tenure of a CMO is 18 months, right? At least in North America, I think it's the same in UK and EU as well, or pretty close. And I think that data point is telling us that the CMO role has morphed into, it's basically a Frankenstein role, is what you were describing. I personally think like that analytical part of it, like the more systems part of it. I think today's really good or great marketing operations leaders should probably be tomorrow's CMOs. And then we need to pull brand, and your comment about like the emotional part of it, because ultimately, like brand does a lot, but I think the key part of it is like the emotional resonance, both for people inside the company and people externally. And it's hard to go from like systems thinking to emotional thinking and do both in a great way. So yeah, I think it's got to be pulled away from the CMO, because, and again, we see it show up like great brands are rare now. Like Liquid Death is amazing, but it's rare. Red Bull is great, but it's rare. Like there should be more amazing brands, but the oxygen, they've been deprived of oxygen, I feel like, in most organizations.
Yeah, and I think they should not see this as a threat. They should see this as a welcome partnership. I mean, at Cannes in 2024, there was a really great talk that I watched, which was from DoorDash, and they had the ECD of DoorDash and the CMO, and they really were working together, and they were such a powerful duo. And for me, I was like, that's really interesting. That's the future of building a brand. And they were able to respond to things really fast because they had these in-house capabilities. But because the ECD was working so closely with the CMO, so close to the business insights, they were able to create some really powerful moments for the brand.
So why aren't there more creative leaders at the C-suite? Is part of it that the creative leaders themselves don't realize their own potential and they can't see the path forward, which I guess, pun intended, part of the reason why you may have put out this pathways model? Is it that CEOs don't understand it? They don't see the potential. They don't see the value. So does the education need to happen, like both with the creative leaders in terms of their own potential and with CEOs in terms of, um, here is the potential that you haven't tapped into and why it's to your detriment that you haven't, especially moving forward.
I mean, I do think it's been a struggle for a long time. I mean, in the UK, we had the Design Council that was set up to really champion design and business. And for some reason, we just didn't really progress. And I think that maybe things weren't in the right. I don't know. Maybe brand wasn't in the right place. I'm not sure. I think the creative industry as a whole has done themselves a huge disservice because we've been very focused on talking about creativity and taste. And I can see the taste conversation coming back up again now with AI. And I'm like, we have to be really careful about that because we spent a long time deciding that we were the tastemakers, which worked in the Mad Men era, when you were in your own room and you were exposing yourself to things that your client wasn't able to see. But we're just not in that era now. And I think taste is a very dangerous place for us to be unless we can back that up with impact. No one at design or design school learns anything about business. I didn't really learn anything about business till I did my MA and before I set up my own agency. And I think now I can see the glaring gaps, and that's one of the things we really major on at Inside Out is giving that commercial context, understanding the conversations in the boardroom, understanding how you build relationships, how you manage stakeholders. And in fact, on my podcast, I have just interviewed a CFO, and it's like, what does a CFO need to know about you as an in-house creative leader? So there's a huge education piece that creatives need to go on. But I also find that creatives tend to have two schools of thought. Some of them are like Ivan, where they recognize they're in a company that doesn't understand them and that they don't understand that company, and they get quick to work to really work out what's going on, and they really think like an entrepreneur, and they're using their creative thinking and their design thinking. And there's another school of thought of designers where they believe they're the tastemakers, that people should really understand and value what they're doing, and it's not their job to educate the rest of the business. And I don't know, I'm much more of a proactive person, and I think, someone's got to make the first move, and we understand what we do, so I feel like it has to come from us. But there's not a single business book that I've read when starting up my own company that really talks about brand and creativity and design, all the things that I tell the Entrepreneurial Institute at King's and Imperial. None of that's in a basic business book. How to write a creative brief, things like that. So there's a huge education gap, but equally I think that the planets weren't aligned in the way that I've already talked to, which allows us, if we do this education piece, and I think that on the business side they're starting to get it. We've got more and more successful companies that have had brand at the heart. Liquid Death that you mentioned, your Airbnbs. I feel like the business world is now understanding brand in a different way. So it's been a challenge, but I think we've got to get there now, Nish, surely.
We have to, and just sort of connecting some of the dots about what you just shared, and it's so incredibly valuable, is that like brand is a moat, full stop, and it's a moat because, again, in the age of AI, as it becomes easier to like copy and commoditize, just not creative work, but anything. Like if somebody's got a software, and I'm already again, Silicon Valley is a canary in the coal mine. Some of these companies that just were founded over the last 18 months as pure AI pure plays, like some of these AI coding companies, their ramp up in terms of monthly recurring revenue outstrips anything we've seen from any other SaaS company or any other type of business. But their churn rates are higher as well because people, like, others can copy an idea and build much more quickly. So if I like your website, I can copy it. If I like your software application or iOS app, I can copy it. And in that world, again, creativity is going to matter so much more. And creativity is really part of like the meta, which is brand. And that needs to be at the heart of a company because there's not going to be many moats left. Scale, speed, knowledge, those are no longer moats because AI makes that infinite and trending towards zero cost. It is, even people talk about like, oh, data will be a moat for us because we have some unique data, maybe for a while, but I can create synthetic data. So there goes your unique data moat. It will be the human things that I believe are moats. And in terms of, Ivan being an example and others that will follow, it's that human work of like those conversations to understand the company, understand what's going on in the world around us. And then that ends up shaping the way we define our brand and then how we express that in whatever way, whether it's through creative work for the marketing engine, whether it's for how we speak to our customers, even how we do anything as an organization. That should be like the brand should be felt through every facet of the business.
Yeah, totally. And we're talking about, tech businesses, and I know Scott Galloway is all about product and he's not about brands, but brand is applicable to every single business, whether you're B2B, B2C, D2C. Brand is the one lever. You're right, everything else can be copied. Don't get me wrong, to have a sustainable business, you need a good product or a service, because you don't want to spend all that time acquiring customers with a great brand and then you fall over. So I'm not negating the importance of a product and service. But liquid death is a prime example, and there's some people in the marketing world have said, oh, you can't use liquid death as an example, and I can't really see a good argument against it. They really understand brand and creativity, and their marketing, their product is water, and I think it's not even spring water. I think it's filtered water.
Yeah.
So why can't we use that as a prime example of the opportunity that brand has?
Yeah, bang on. For anyone listening that hasn't watched it, I'll put a link in the comment in the show notes again. But Scott Galloway, Prof G, he's been talking lately about brand no longer matters, which is ironic because he made his riches off of a brand consultancy. And he's one of the foremost thinkers, in my opinion, around brand. And he had this great discussion with Rory Sutherland. I think it was on the um, Unfiltered CMO podcast or something. But I'll put a link in the show notes. You should check it out. And I usually agree with Mr. Galloway on a lot of things. I would get up on stage with that guy and debate him about brand now, because I think products and great products, great services, that will be table stakes, because that we could use AI to copy like 24 hours a day. What will be differentiated is the human parts, the feeling parts. And that's what brand is. You want people to feel like people feel something about liquid death. Like there's no water tasting expert like the sommelier of water who sits there and like tastes liquid death and goes, "Oh my God, this is amazing. It's the best water I've ever had." It's just like, no, it's all brand. It's all emotion. It's all the weird, soft, messy, irrational human things that have allowed that company to achieve amazing success. It's
Yeah.
all human stuff. It's a
But
brand.
it's also, I mean, I really want Scott Galloway to come on my podcast, but he's ghosted me so far. He's not responding to any of my reach outs, obviously. But I think what Liquid Death also do really well is they really stand for something. Like you've talked about this before in terms of the way that agencies are changing, where in this world, I think you have to be really spiky on something. You have to be really niche. When you're on a global stage, you can, there's 8 billion people on this planet. How many customers do you need to have a really sustainable business? You don't need to be the next Coca-Cola. You don't need to be the next Meta. So for me, it's also this shift in thinking of, when you're on a global stage, finding enough of your customers, of your tribe. And that again is what brand does. It's those stories that people resonate and connect with and identify with, that companies just need to be tapping into now. We need to forget everything else. We need to forget the way that business has been done before. And certainly the way business has been done in our career niche. The times really have changed, but I think it's really exciting because there's a real democracy of companies now. You don't need to have the budgets and the scale of Coca-Cola to be a successful drinks brand anymore.
No, I don't know if really large companies exist in the future. I think we're at the start of a very messy transition period, and I think what will come out of it is an amazing new reality in terms of the way businesses operate and the way we can start them. And it will, I think entrepreneurs are going to have the best times of their lives. Truly creative people are going to have the best times of their lives through and on the other side of this transition. And we've touched on AI. It's been peppered in, but I want to bring it back to the pathways model in AI. So somebody's reading the report, and through the report, they're able to self-identify and put themselves into one of the 4 zones. I also found it interesting that I think in your report, I remember reading like it's not about you're not anchored in one zone at any one moment. You could sort of be straddling multiple zones, which sort of reflects the complexity of like life in general. We're not single dimensional beings, either personally or professionally. Um, what are you talking about in your community about AI? Like, what are the cautions that you're talking about, especially with creative leaders? Because you're on this mission again to get them into the C-suite. they're now being presented with these magical AI tools. Oh, scale and speed and all that is taken care of. Just push a button, and cost efficiency as the cherry on top. What are you what are you telling them to be cautious about? What are you telling them to like fully embrace and like run with it? Because it'll get you to the C-suite.
Yeah, I think, first of all, even though, I feel like I'm almost doing a PhD in in-house creative leadership. I feel very uncomfortable talking on behalf of the community or positioning myself as the authority because I am not in the weeds like my members are. I feel like my job is much more of a curator and seeing what's going on. So when you say, what are you telling your community? I'm just very mindful of like, I don't necessarily want to tell the community, but I'm trying to pull in the experts. But certainly the themes and patterns that I'm seeing that my community are telling me, that our advisors are also sharing, is one, to own the conversation around AI. So a lot of times with in-house teams is they've been quite stuck where they're waiting for policy and security checks and things like that. Like I hosted a session at MadFest in London in 2024 with some of our members, and we named the session the Hare and the Tortoise Race because it felt like agencies can race ahead, but in-house we're going slower, but actually that's working to their advantage. And what in-house teams and our leaders are doing is they're getting their house in order so they can really capitalize on AI. So they are looking at automation and their processes. And if you don't have those foundations in place, you really can't take advantage of AI. So a lot of them have been doing that work behind the scenes. And then they're going to be able to build in AI as part of that. But I think it's really difficult. We're now looking at how do we help our leaders really navigate, because there's all these tools coming out, and the other challenge you have when you're in-house is actually being able to take advantage or even implementing a tool. The technology is changing so fast. By the time you've convinced the business and got procurement to sign off a platform, there's probably something better out there. So I think our response and the sense I'm getting is not necessarily any new tech coming in, but how do you optimize what you have? How do you use AI that's been inbuilt? And how do you really use AI to automate? But attention I can definitely see when you have a team is, what's my motivation as an employee of a team to really take advantage of AI? Am I really going to show an organization that my job can be done in half the time? I just don't think that there's enough trust that your team members as an in-house creative leader are motivated enough to really harness AI. And again, I think that's a role for an in-house creative leader, is to really carve out the vision for your team. What does your team look like, and what's the role that you're going to play when you take advantage of AI? And that's where I'm starting to realize actually the pathway can help, because AI should be getting rid of the zone 1, zone 2 stuff that's really keeping you kind of bogged down. And AI should be allowing you to move up and aspire to being in zone 4. And I'm hoping that the pathway tool also acts as something that you can use to have a conversation or to map out what your team looks like once you've started to take advantage of AI, and where else in the business can you be adding value.
Yeah, I love that. And we're going to wrap up talking a bit more about the pathways model and sort of what you see as the path ahead. Can't help myself with the path puns. There I go again. But before we get to that, a couple of comments and then a couple of other topics before we wrap up. I love that idea of using the pathways model as a way of sort of imagining what the future could look like and how do you get there. And then for that zone 1 and zone 2 work, which is really the execution work, and maybe some like, low level like thinking work, if I could call it that. I think I wrote something that I put up on LinkedIn today. It's May 26th. Is I think the the transition organizations are going through is they're moving from doing organizations to thinking organizations. And when I was reading your report, like what really came out at me was like, oh, this is a thinking mindset now. This isn't about the doing. Like AI is going to be an amazing partner for the doing and also be like a collaborator or co-pilot, insert whatever terms comfortable for you here through that, like through the true creative work, the imagination work. It could sort of be to prompt us and things like that. But I think every organization is going from like doing to thinking. And your model, like in terms of creative leadership, for me, really sort of docks into that transition and the way they should be taking that. And as you said, like let's get into a room and we've now got like where are we today and how do we feel about where this is telling us where we are today and what does the journey look like to get into zone 4, and then coming up with a way to talk about it with the CEO and the C suite, because this is to their benefit ultimately as well, to the business's benefit too. But I love that. I love that suggestion. Are you seeing any of your members do that already? I would imagine you are, or you're about
Well, kind of. I've definitely been running some vision settings using the pathway, and just going back to what you said earlier, there's definitely a sense of actually sometimes, even though you're one team and you feel like you're operating in one zone, what's been a revelation when I've run the workshop is that people have then seen that actually with different departments, they have different roles. So actually, how can they be consistently in one zone? I mean, I only launched the pathway in March to our members, and now I want to give it away publicly because for me, there really aren't enough resources out there for in-house creative leadership. And if I want to see more, CCOs, I really need to give them a way of getting into the C-suite. So for me, it's going to be free to download, forever, and it's a starting point. I do want it to be a co-creation. I've marked this as V1, but really I want people to improve on it and shape it with me. I feel like it's an open source piece of content. But hopefully it's starting to become a bit of or will become a bit of a shared language for in-house creative leadership, and it will really help people have these discussions, and also for CEOs to really see what the opportunity is for their in-house team in a way perhaps that has not been clear, that's been a bit of a tangle, that hasn't really been well articulated. And really, I'm hoping that I'm building on Adam Morgan's great work, because his starting point of those 5 pillars, I don't think I could have built this model without the clarity that he got with those. So I feel like together we're all generously trying to help improve in-house creative leadership.
We should talk about it offline, but I think there's some really cool ways. I'd love to learn more about the workshops and how you're running them. And I think there's some cool ways in which you might consider using AI as a way of then putting together the business case and the pitch to the CEO and the C-suite. But we could take that offline. I've been playing with some of that myself lately on some of the other projects I'm working on, and it's been mind blowing, like truly mind blowing. But a couple of other things I want to touch on before we wrap up. One is this is the Creative Ops podcast, so I'm a creative ops leader. I'm listening to this. I'm nodding my head violently. Creative leaders should be at the C-suite. They might be tomorrow's CEOs. Um, Emma and Nish are making all the sense in the world, and I want to join Emma's community and get my hands on this model. Cool. What should my role be? Because I've been recording some episodes lately, and people have asked me both on camera and offline, what is the future of creative operations? And to some people, I've said, well, if it keeps going the way it's going right now, I don't think it'll exist in 5 years as a role. Um, but I think there's a massive opportunity, just like you've like beautifully articulated for creative leaders and what their path should be and the business rationale for it. I think creative operations leaders need to be thinking about how do I create the system that allows creative leaders to navigate that journey. And I think it's about like the systems that creative operations people have long been focused on is defined by people, process, and technology in pursuit of scale, speed, cost optimization. But AI is probably going to do most all of that because it's algorithmic work. And I think the real opportunity for creative ops leaders is to partner with creative leaders to almost be their. I've always thought of them as like the de facto chief operating officer to create that help create that system of creative culture, not just on the creative team, but how does this start to extend with the teams they currently directly work with, like marketing and others? And then how does it become part of like this diffuse skill set and capability across the entire org chart? I think that's the opportunity for creative operations professionals. Otherwise,
Def-
the things of today, I think they go extinct.
I think you're right. I think it's definitely about how do you become the enabler. I certainly think that the most successful in-house creative teams will have an ops person and a creative at the helm. I've talked about this before in terms of creative duos. It's in our report as something that we identified. And I think, we really need creative teams really need to have a strategy of not touching everything, but influencing everything.
Yeah.
And I think that creative operations and how you operate and how you become integral in a business becomes a huge part of that. How are you going to enable the business? How are you going to help creativity and design to infiltrate the business? How do you really help to have, every single touch point mapped, and how do you make use of AI and technology to help you do that? So yeah, it's moving from it's thinking. It's like you said earlier, from doing to really thinking, and that's a much funner role for a creative to be in, right?
I think it is because like thinking is innately human. I think we've sort of gotten lulled into the doing work because it's convenient, it's easy. You know, um, you could sit down at a desk and somebody says, "Okay, here's your job. You do these 5 things daily, these 3 things weekly, these 4 things monthly." And a quarterly report. And it's like, oh, great. Like, I just got a paint by numbers job. And there's a certain short-term attractiveness to it, but most people end up finding that soul sucking. It's the thinking work, the things that like make us pull our hair out. If I had any hair, I'd be pulling it out, right? Like when it's 1 a.m. and I'm trying to write something, and it's like I just can't quite like get the idea. But again, that's where I love using AI to go like be Socrates and ask me questions to help me think through this idea. Don't do it for me. Think through it with me, or push me, prompt me. And yeah, I think creative operations leaders who are listening, you should be mirroring this journey, working with your creative leaders, figuring out what zone you're in. And your job is to figure out the journey of how do we go from current zone to zone 4. And then really it's a creative culture in the organization and not just, yeah, we make creative content because I think most of that's going to get outsourced to AI is what's going to happen.
Totally.
So just wrapping up here, could you give me like, do you have a story about like what does creative leadership look like at the C-suite? Because it's not somebody like pulling out like, oh hey guys, let me show you what I can mock up in Photoshop. Like, what does that conversation look like? The chief creative officer is sitting at the C-suite table with the CEO, the CFO, and others. By the way, side note, really looking forward to your CFO conversation. I I think creativity as a organizational asset should be on the balance sheet at some point. Because if it's going to be that important, it should be on the balance sheet, just like brand is for some organizations as part of goodwill. But um, we won't go down that rabbit hole today. And but what are those conversations like? What do they sound like? What do they feel like? Like, what have you maybe heard in your community?
In terms of the conversations in the C-suite, do you think in terms of
Yeah, like a
that
chief creative officer sitting at the C-suite table, like what is he or she bringing to that conversation? Because it's not the conversation that he or she is having when sort of like in terms of day-to-day operations, in terms of a campaign discussion or anything like that?
It's going to be much more about solving genuine business problems. You know, looking at the business, looking at the revenue for the next 12 months and thinking what are the opportunities, knowing our customers really, really well and thinking about how to connect with them in new ways. What are the other products and services that as a brand we can tap into? What's going on in culture that we can capitalize on? I really think that it's the more I think about this and the more conversations I have that, you know, and I found this as a creative, entrepreneurship is probably one of the most creative things I've ever done in my life, and it continues to be. And I feel like as a creative leader, an in-house creative leader, you will be much more of an entrepreneur, and you'll be using brand and creativity as the medium that you use to solve those business problems. And I just think that it's going to give us more interesting businesses, and I think it's a really exciting career trajectory for people who who are really passionate about creativity and design, whether you are a creative director by trade or your creative operations, whether you know how to make the work or you're making the work. I think it's just going to be a really interesting time for commercial creativity.
I 100% agree with you. I would imagine having a chief creative officer at the C-suite table also leads to much more interesting questions. And maybe that's part of the pitch to the CEOs. Like, when's the last time you got an interesting question that genuinely made you think for not just like the next 5 minutes, but for hours and days and weeks on end? And I think some of the best creative leaders I've been around, like I'm still thinking about things that Ivan Pauls told me during our episode. And they've rooted themselves in my brain. And I think that's one of the biggest values that you get out of those chief creative officers at the C-suite table is just simply the questions they ask and the prompting they think that wasn't happening before.
It's the problem solving, isn't it? I think
Yep.
as a creative, we do solve problems in very different ways, and I think we know how to create emotion and we know how to connect with audiences. So who doesn't need more of that in the boardroom?
Of course. So wrapping up here, Emma, we started off with your mission, taking the creatives out of the corner, getting them into the C-suite. It feels like this pathways model is like it's like at least the current sort of manifestation of all the work you've been doing for a number of years, the things you've been thinking about for many more years. And I personally found it to be fascinating. I tend to like throw away most things that start with "I have a model," but this one was it really pulled me in. So for whatever that's worth to the listeners, I found this one to be uh, incredibly insightful, both in terms of the opportunities that could be unlocked today and really making a organization much more adaptable and resilient to the changes that are starting to unfold and that are only going to accelerate. So like what's going like is this available to members of your community? Can anyone become a member of your community? Tell us a little bit about that, and maybe if you could even touch on the workshops that you mentioned you're running.
Yeah, so the pathway has been available to our members only, but we've just launched it publicly now because really I feel like, I don't know, I have an abundance mindset niche, as do you. And I just think, the more information I can put out there, the better. And also in the hope that, in these changing times, we can help craft that together. But our members, so I would say the Inside Out community is a bit of an ecosystem, all in line with our vision of getting more leaders into the C-suite. So we do have our membership, but you have to be an in-house creative leader to be a part of our membership there. And there's lots that we're doing in terms of events, peer-to-peer coaching, our advisors, to name a few. We then have our awards as well. So our awards are unique. They recognize the unique ways in-house creative teams add impact. Again, there's a lot of new awards arising now, and they're all about in-house agencies. We're much more inclusive of all the different types of in-house creative teams out there. So we look at celebrating the craft, the impact, the teams and individuals. And then we've just started launching a suite of training. Again, I could see a lot of people just using the training that always worked for agencies and applying that to in-house. And what we're doing is we're co-creating training with our advisors or members of our community so that it is fit for purpose for in-house. And the workshop session I've been doing with a couple of our members really to help them really think about the future of their team and using the pathway model as a way to help them brainstorm with their teams and paint that picture. So it's been a really fun kind of workshop session, but I'd love to chat more about how we could use AI to bring that to more teams.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that offline, as I mentioned. And but this was I love this conversation. Whenever you and I get together, it's a delightful chat. And again, just like with I was mentioning my conversation with Ivan, this one will stay with me for a while. And for anyone listening, in-house creative leaders, creative ops leaders, CMOs, you know, get on board with what Emma's talking about. At least expose yourself to the knowledge, read the report. If you're an in-house creative leader, consider joining the community. I'm familiar with some of the workshops they've done. They seem to be, no fluff, all impact. So it's high signal. And I just love the mission that you're on, which is, again, taking creative leaders out of the corner and putting them on the path to get into the C-suite. And I believe that is paramount for organizations to survive and thrive in the world that is unfolding. So ignore the report at your own detriment. And on that note, I will put all the links in the show notes and again, encourage people to check it out. Emma, thank you so much for doing this with me today.
Thank you, Nish. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.